Joining us now to discuss the latest developments in Washington, Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on Court TV. I want to talk to you about last year, what you did on the Senate floor, making those arguments, defending President Trump, not because of partisan politics, but because you are a staunch defender of the Constitution. And one of the things I remember you stressing was that you need constitutionally authorized criteria in order to impeach. So it seems to me today that much of what you argued last time is applicable today, here and now, in this second push for impeachment. Tell me, do you agree?
Even more so, because now they're trying to impeach President Trump on the basis of a constitutionally protected speech. So this involves not only the criteria for impeachment under the Constitution, which the Democrats tried to stretch beyond any rational basis, but they're also trying to impeach him in violation of the First Amendment. The speech he made, which I disapprove of thoroughly, I think he was wrong to give it. But the speech he made was completely protected by the Constitution. The leading case is Brandenburg versus Ohio, which involved a Ku Klux Klan Nazi who was making terrible allegations, killed the Jews, send the blacks back to Africa. And the Supreme Court unanimously held that that was protected unless there was an immediate incitement and direct incitement to violence. And that's not what happened on Wednesday of last week.
Professor, is there even time for an impeachment trial, given the president has 9 more days left in office?
No, there is not. And that also raises serious constitutional questions. You can't impeach unless you're going to give the president a trial. And you can't have an impeachment process once the president left office. It's only designed to remove a president. Incidental, collateral effect could be that he couldn't run again. But the core is to remove him from office. And there just isn't enough time under the Senate schedule. You couldn't even have a vote on this until 1 o'clock in the afternoon on January 20th, an hour after President Trump becomes Mr. Trump, and so it would be unconstitutional to impeach him.
Professor, I'd like to talk to you about the way that some have characterized the riot at the Capitol. We've heard words used like insurrection, treason, terrorism, a coup d'etat. And I've been listening to your podcast, The Dersh Show, and on your podcast you talked about how it's not any of these things, but what you really worry most about is our Constitution. Would you explain to us why, please?
Yeah, I've been speaking to people in Israel. They are outraged when people call this terrorism. They know what terrorism is. Terrorism is going to a school and murdering 34 children in cold blood. Terrorism is blowing up an airplane in the air and killing 250 people. Terrorism is deliberately seeking to murder people in the interest of serving a political. This was not terrorism. This was violence. It was a riot. It was all of those things. But it wasn't an insurrection. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't sedition. And it wasn't terrorism. It was violent people who should be prosecuted and punished till the end of the law.
Professor Dershowitz, I want to talk to you a little more about the president's speech last Wednesday, if I can, please. And as you know, here at Court TV, we focus on the facts, and the law and politics stays out. So what I really want to talk to you is how the law relates to, and you touched on it a moment ago. And with respect to some of the allegations that there was this incitement of violence by the president against our Capitol, can you tell us, what does our Constitution say about that?
Well, the Constitution distinguishes between advocacy, which is protected by the Constitution. For example, you can advocate overthrow of the government. You can say, I think the government should be overthrown. I think the Supreme Court should be abolished. I think segregation should be restored. You can advocate anything you want. You can't incite. Incitement means telling somebody directly, do it now, do it violently, do it now. If the president had said, I am leading you now, and we're going to break in together to the Capitol, and we're going to kill policemen, and we're going to take over the Senate, that would be incitement. But making a general speech, hundreds of people have made a similar speech in the Capitol. They've said, march to the Capitol, show we're strong, show we're fighting for our rights. This was done by suffragettes, by civil rights activists. Those are good people. It was also done by the Klan. It was also done by neo-Nazis and by communists. No matter who does it, it's protected speech. Go to the Capitol is protected speech. It's petitioning the government for a redress of grievances protected by 2 elements of the First Amendment.
I remember you talking on your podcast, The Dersh Show, about how you worry about the First Amendment being eroded with a lot of these calls and with this push for impeachment for incitement of insurrection. Would you elaborate on that more, please, Professor?
What I'm worried about is the precedent this will set. It took us years and years and years to establish the distinction between dissent and incitement. And it's very important that we preserve that distinction. And here, in the interests of ending the presidency a few days early, many people on the left, many people who ought to know better, are prepared to compromise what we fought for so many years to preserve under the First Amendment. The difference between advocating something and actually doing it. We ought to punish the doers. Jefferson wrote about that in 1801. Madison wrote about that. That's part of our constitutional heritage, distinguishing between those who advocate and those who commit violent acts.
The position is that the president's speech last Wednesday is protected speech. You can love it or hate
Right.
it, but it is
That's right.
protected. And going back to your original point that in order to have an impeachment, you have to have constitutionally authorized criteria, and this one
That's
is
right.
not because that speech was protected.
Absolutely right. The Constitution talks about treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This doesn't fall into any of those categories. This is protected speech, and it would establish a terrible precedent to be able to impeach a president or anybody else for exercising his constitutional right to speak and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
Professor, as you know, there was a push to try to invoke the 25th Amendment, and something that you've talked about in your podcast is that it isn't applicable in this case. Would you explain to us why, please?
It's not even a close question. This is an attempt to really stretch the 25th Amendment beyond any possible meaning. The 25th Amendment was intended for a president who had a stroke like Woodrow Wilson, a president who was shot like Ronald Reagan, even a president who had to go in for a 2-hour-long colonoscopy, but who was unconscious. It does not apply to a president you disagree with, even to a president who's committed an impeachable offense. Then impeach him. But you can't use the 25th Amendment. This president is capable of serving. In the next 8 days, he can help bring about peace in the Middle East, which he's tried to do. He can pardon people. Those are presidential functions he can perform. So it would be wrong to invoke the 25th Amendment. And Vice President Pence is 100% right in refusing to invoke the 25th Amendment, just as he was right when he refused to try to undo the election on the floor of the Senate. We have to look at the big picture. We are a great and vibrant democracy. The rioters lost. They will be arrested. They will be prosecuted. They lost the vote in the Senate. The marketplace of ideas operated fine. We don't need to be impeaching, disbarring, or preventing people from speaking. We are a great country, and in our country, we can have all sides of every issue presented without efforts to try to suppress free speech.